Hello everyone, welcome back to my home kitchen. This is Annie Wegner-Lafort from the Mindful Palate. MP, Mindful Palate Movement Practitioner, Milwaukee Proud. I thank the Milwaukee Recreation Department for helping us to stay connected during this time. It's a hot one out there today, so I'm grateful that we are not doing too much heated cooking. Today we are making some freezer jams, and yesterday at the end of our demo, I mentioned that we were going to be making some no-cook freezer jams. So that's mostly the case. One of them, we're going to make two today. One of them is a no-cook freezer jam. The other one, I have done a little bit of the heating up already, aired out the kitchen, and we're going to heat up a little bit more. So I was almost correct in telling you that yesterday. So this is why people used to have summer kitchens, so that when they were doing their food preservation, a lot of it, when the harvest was in the tomatoes, I think of, at the end of August or early September, when it can be pretty warm, you could take all of that heat out to another space and not heat up the house. And even if you have central air or something now, you don't want to fight against the mechanical cooling of your house. I never recommend, canning while your house is closed up. Not only because as you're raising the temperature of your house, your air conditioner has to work harder, but also it's just good, especially if you have a gas stove, to let that air out. I could tell you some stories. I won't call them horror stories, but some stories that were a little bit dangerous with things that didn't get fully aerated when I've been canning. So just make sure that if you are doing any canning this time of year, that you do have things open to air. It's not always pleasant. I find myself doing some of my canning, at 9 o'clock at night because it's cooler. So see if you can plan for that, or you can do things in stages. Like today we're going to make a syrup or an infusion with some herbs. You could make that on a hot day and then proceed with the rest of it when it's cooler. Hello, Sandy. Thanks for coming back. So we have two jams today. We have a no-cook strawberry freezer jam, and we also have an herbal freezer jam, or freezer jelly, excuse me. So a jam, the definition between jams and jellies, jams usually have some kind of solids in them, the fruit, or you could have herb particles in there. But we're going to strain ours out today. Excuse me, I thought I heard something was on the stove. A jelly is usually clear, so it's often the juice from some fruit that we have squeezed out, and then we thicken that with our pectin. So you can see here, I have my jelly bag hanging from my cabinet. So this is what I do. You can buy a jelly strainer. It's like a conical strainer that's a very fine mesh strainer. Actually, that's not true. That's a chinoise. I'm getting my kitchen tools and my canning tools mixed up. That is a thing, the chinoise. But a jelly strainer is it's still a conical strainer that has little perforated holes in it, so it's like solid metal typically. Hi Linda, thanks for coming. And so it has a stand on it, so you can set it over a bowl and put whatever you're straining into it, and just get the juice to come out. I used to have one. I bought it, at like a rummage sale or something, and I never used it. It was one of those additional pieces of equipment. You've heard me talk about how I like to have few pieces of equipment and kind of make other pieces of equipment multitask. And so what I do is, this is just like cheesecloth. Actually cheesecloth, 2 pieces of cheesecloth, which might have been overkill at this point, but that we used in past weeks for various things, and I washed them, and they washed up beautifully, so you can reuse that cheesecloth. So I tied up the cheesecloth to wring out the juice. This is from our herbs, and then I tied it on my cabinet knob, and it's just dripping over a bowl. So this is called a hack. Hey Karen. So you can kind of rig that up. And I have juice down here. So thank you all for being here today. I know that there are a lot of things on people's minds. There are a lot of places you could be, a lot of things that you could be doing right now. Pounding the pavement, getting out there, letting your voice be heard. I was supposed to be on a conference call at 1, learned that it was moved to Friday. So something else I could have done. Things are just swirling. There's a lot going on. We're trying to do the best we can and be in all the places. So if you've been out doing some of that work this week, I thank you. Maybe right now you're taking a little creative break, so I thank you for being here. So again, I always appreciate your support, and know that my heart is in all the places that hopefully that it needs to be right now. But I'm glad that we're here together. So, hello, Deborah. Okay, so you heard about my rigged up jelly bag, and we'll use that juice in a moment. So I guess I can take that down now because it's done its thing. I have to get that knot out. It's not dripping anymore, so I'm just gonna let that hang from there. Okay. So with our jelly, our jam, I have strawberries. Now these were frozen. We haven't had our strawberry picking season here yet. It will be interesting to see what that is going to be like this season with social distancing. Perhaps there will be more pre-picked strawberries. I'm hoping to still get local berries, but we'll see what that looks like. So these were from last year from Barthel's U-Pick up in Mequon, I believe that is. And I always pick tons and tons, and these were still in the freezer. So I thawed them. So just know that, you've heard me say, if you've been to some of these other classes, if you're trying to do your preservation in the height of the season when everything is ripe, sometimes it's hard to do all of those things. Hi, Tara. And so if you can freeze things, I think of like strawberries or other fruits, or tomatoes. If you're just trying to like get them preserved in some way before they go bad, you can often throw them into the freezer. You can make your sauce another time. You can make your jam or your jelly another time. So this is a way to see that you can make this from frozen and thawed strawberries as well. Now all of that juice that came out when they thawed, I'm going to keep that because that would have been in there, in the beginning if they were fresh. So just remember not to strain that. Okay, so we'll start with that one. So I'm going to take those strawberries and put them into a big bowl. So the recipes that I'm using, they are posted. Milwaukee Rec Department has been wonderful about posting those recipes ahead of time, or linking to them rather, from their Facebook page. So you should be able to find those there. I think it's a PDF. And if you don't have them in front of you, or you're not able to get them, in the next 2 minutes, just sit back and enjoy. And you will have these recipes by Friday. I always put them on my business Facebook page so that you can have them. The rec department link is actually my handout with my logo and all that stuff, so it's more like the syllabus, whereas the ones that I will put up there will just be cut and pasted. So depending on what format you like, you can choose. Okay, so I've got my strawberries in that bowl. But first of all, I'm going to take my sugar. So some advantages of making freezer jams versus actual canned products. So when we are making canned jams and jellies, because we're typically using regular pectin, and I thought I was going to have that. Here it is. There. Okay. So Sure Gel is our powdered pectin. It's one of the brand names of powdered pectin. There's also this ball variety, and they have low sugar, no sugar pectin, regular pectin, a freezer pectin we're going to use later. But one of the advantages, okay, so when you're using a regular powdered pectin, part of what makes it work, part of what makes it gel, is the amount of sugar that's added. And if you've ever made canned jams and jellies with regular powdered pectin, you might have almost fainted seeing how much sugar goes into those, like cups and cups and cups. And so if this is when, I get people coming into my classes who are trying to do their best to make a lot of things from scratch, and then they're like, oh cool, I want to do jams and jellies, and then they see the amount of sugar and they're just like, what? So you can make low sugar, no sugar jams and jellies, but with a specific type of pectin. So with this, because we don't need that in our heat process, in this recipe anyway, with this freezer jam, there isn't as much sugar that's going to be added. So that's sort of a relief. So just know that if that's something you're concerned about, you might want to do, a freezer jam or a refrigerator jam. Now, the disadvantage is that you need to have that space in your fridge or freezer. So if you have a small space, or you have a freezer that's loaded with, all kinds of other things, you might not have that. Whereas if you can can it, no other energy is needed to preserve that. It sits on a shelf. And so you can make as many as you have space for, in your pantry. So just to put that out there, if you're considering, maybe I really don't want to can things. Maybe I want to do all freezer jams. Okay, cool. But make sure you've got the space to do it. So there you are. Okay, so I have my sugar, a cup and a half of sugar for the strawberries here, and then 5 tablespoons of this freezer pectin. So this is, like I said, specifically a freezer pectin. So I like that Ball has come out with these bulk containers. Usually things come in a box and it's like one packet goes into one recipe, and it seems like there's a little bit more waste with packaging. So I do like that they have it in bulk. So, so I'm going to mix that pectin in with the sugar to start. So again, this freezer pectin is specially formulated to make this gel without the heat process and without as much sugar. And the same with that low sugar, no sugar. So because sugar is part of the chemistry of making jams and jellies gel, given their consistency, if you just start pulling sugar away from it, it's not going to work as well. So use the right type of pectin for the recipe, even liquid pectin versus powder. Stick with what your recipe recommends. Okay, so we put the strawberries into this bowl, and I'm just going to crush them here. I have a like a potato masher. You could put them into the food processor. I decided to give mine a rest today. You know, I like to use it. So if you wanted there to be, you know, some smaller pieces, you could certainly, or you wanted it to be more of a puree, you could put it in, even in the blender. This would work well in the blender. We've had some questions in past weeks about what's the difference between the blender and the food processor, or could I use my blender instead of the food processor? And so because there's a lot of liquid in here, you could use a regular blender to mix it as well. So I'm gonna go for this method, which is going to allow some bigger chunks of fruit. I like when, actually, I'll be honest, I'm not a huge jam and jelly person. I make all of these, I love making them, and I end up giving them away as gifts. I don't know what that is. I've just not been a big, I said I'm not a big jam and jelly person with toast anyway. I do enjoy mixing it into some yogurt, or maybe using it, you know, in a crisp or something, which we're gonna do tomorrow with some other ingredients. But so anyway, I do like, if I am eating it on toast, I do like having some bigger chunks of fruit in my jams and jellies. Okay, so I've got that all mixed. Let me put this to the side. Okay, so now I'm gonna mix the sugar and pectin in to the strawberries, and just make sure that that is fully incorporated. And then we're gonna let it sit. And then we fill the jars, and it's as simple as that. So again, making these is pretty simple. So if you're trying to use that fresh local fruit quickly, you want to get some jams made right away, you could start making some freezer jams. I don't want the preservation process for any local foods to be stressful. It can be, I mean, especially if you're growing things in your own garden, and so you're faced with using, you know, what you have. I mean, it's your choice if you go to a U-Pick or you go to the farmer's market. But when you have things in your yard that you've put time and energy into growing, and you want to use them all, there can be some panic that ensues. So this is also why I recommend, you know, I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago, having like a preservation posse, or like the can clan, so that you can get this stuff processed in a timely fashion before it goes bad. And then everybody gets to take some home. It could be kind of fun. All right. Ooh, Sandy says there's a berry chia jam. Yeah, I have seen that. I've never tried it. And I don't know that that has pectin in it. I think that's a refrigerator jam. And as I mentioned yesterday in some other classes, the chia seeds, when introduced to water, have that sort of mucilaginous quality. That's the only word I can find to best describe. It's kind of like the flax seeds that I was using yesterday. It's mucilaginous, so it is kind of that thickening. So I haven't made it, but I know of it. I've used chia seeds in some puddings and things. And we did it in the smoothie class too. We made a wonderful, like a lemon meringue smoothie with the chia seeds. It was delightful. But yeah, they do have that quality of kind of thickening things up. So let me know if you try that, Sandy. Let me know how that turns out. Okay, so we're gonna let this sit and do its thing while we move on to our herbal jelly. Okay, so the tools, just so you know what tools I'm using, I have my jars here. They're all clean and ready. And I have my jar filler. So this looks like a funnel, but it has a larger bottom. And this one is aluminum. I got it from my grandma. I should probably get a different one soon that's a different material. But They have stainless steel, they have plastic. I've even seen some glass ones at antique stores. So that is a handy thing. I use it a lot for filling jars, even if I'm just putting, transferring beans from a package into the jars in my pantry that you may have seen. It just gives it a little bit of a bigger opening so that it's not splishing and falling all over the place. And so with these jars, because we're not putting these into a hot water bath, you really could use whatever jars you want as long as they're sturdy enough for the freezer. So if you have some, just random jars, I save a lot of jars. I use them for, I don't know, putting food items into, but also storing dry things. And sometimes lately I've been using them to root little plant cuttings. So anyway, I'm one of those people that has all these little random cool jars around in the basement. But you also don't have to worry too much about the top. So if you have some of those solid tops, you could use those solid tops, or 2 pieces. This one would typically have a rubber gasket if we're using it for canning. You don't really have to worry about that here. So, and I also mentioned that the metal tops like this can only be used once for canning. So if you have some of those lying around that you don't know what to do with because you can't really recycle them, you could use them for freezer jam. So maybe you have them in a special box that says, use only for XYZ. You could use them for this because they're not going to be going through that canning process. They don't have to seal like they would to be shelf stable. Okay. All right. So with this freezer jelly, so I'm using lemon balm. We used that a couple weeks ago or was it last week for some baked goods. I have so much lemon balm. I had forgotten that I planted some in my front yard as well. I share a space with my neighbor, and it's just going bonkers. So I cut some from there and got some from the back. So we'll use that here. So we're making an herbal infusion. So it's 3 cups of this herbal infusion. So it's 3.5 cups of boiling water, and then a cup of those minced herbs, and also a tablespoon of grated lemon peel. You could use dry, you could use fresh. Again, if it's dry, you want to go half of that. It's all in the recipe that you'll see. And so you could use basil, you could use mint, you could do sage, rosemary, whatever you want. What else did I have today that was, I have chives. I make a lot of herbal jellies for my client. I do food preservation for a client who has a farm. And I've made some savory jellies too that can be really beautiful on with meats. So if you pack, a picnic lunch sandwiches, you could do a chive jelly with some roasted turkey breast or something like that. So it's kind of fun to play with some of those ideas. All right, so I made this infusion. It was kind of like making a tea, and then I just strained it through that jelly bag or any kind of fine mesh strainer, and now we'll mix it with our. We're going to mix it with the pectin and the sugar. Okay, so I'm going to stir the sugar into this mixture. So it's just kind of a clear, like yellowish looking juice. And in the recipe, I don't know, did I put it in here? I actually didn't put it on this recipe. I adjusted it from the recipe that I had. If you wanted this to be a green, sort of herby color, as far as I know, you would probably need to add some kind of food coloring. I did that once last year. I was making something for my client, and I went overboard because, I don't like to use artificial colorings in food, but I wanted it to look a certain way, and I put way too much, and I had to just completely get rid of the batch. So it's like a little dot will do ya, and it can be a beautiful kind of a spring green color, but otherwise it's just, most green herbs are just going to kind of be this golden color. So just know that. If you want it to be different, you're going to have to add something. All right, so pouring that sugar in, it can be whatever kind of sugar you want. I just typically use a granulated sugar. It can be organic or sugar in the raw, but if you wanted to use something like a coconut sugar, or we had that powdered jaggery, which is an Indian cane sugar, you might have a different color and a little bit richer flavor because it's got more of the, some of those have more of the, kind of molasses-y flavor to them. So just mixing this until that sugar dilates. So with these, the thing that needs to happen a lot is that they need to sit for a little bit. Okay, I'm going to put this one aside then. I'm going to let that sit for a bit to kind of soak up more of that sugar, to let it dissolve. So back to our strawberries. We're going back and forth here. We're going to start filling these jars. All right. And hopefully I have enough jars. Maybe I'll just fill a certain number. I only brought so many up from the basement for both of these recipes. So, all right, so just taking a ladle. And again, with this, you don't have to pay quite as much attention to the headspace. Actually, you know what? I take that back. We're freezing, and so there is going to be expansion. So still pay attention to the headspace, but it's for a different reason than the headspace that we preserve in canning. So that headspace is the space between the very top of the jar, so the top of the glass, down to the top of the product. And so in canning, if you're doing a hot water bath can, that is the space in which that product is boiling while it's processing. So it needs that space to move around. If it doesn't have it, it's going to go up and out of the jar, and you're not going to get a seal. So in the case of freezing, we would allow that headspace because of expansion. So you don't want to fill it to the brim, and then as soon as this freezes, it's going to blow or crack the jar. I've had canning jars crack in the freezer. More often than I've had them crack in the canning pot. So just know that is still a concern, but for a different reason, right? And again, you can always leave more headspace. You don't want to leave, a full inch, because then you're really just wasting jar space. And over time, if you're doing a lot of canning, that can add up to needing a lot of extra jars. And then again, if you have limited storage space, that's the trouble that you run into there. So this is going to be, it's still very liquidy here as we're putting it in, as it would be as well. It's not actually, solidifying or gelling quite yet. That will come later. It's not like, well, it is kind of like Jell-O, where, it needs to sit in the fridge. It's not instant, not quite instant gelatinization. Oh, this might be actually the perfect amount of jars. I might save a little bit to mix into some yogurt, a little snack. So we'll put that to the side. So I am still going to wipe the rims like we would do if we were canning it, and that's just so I don't have a lot of sticky stuff hanging out. So again, with the canning process, we usually wipe the rim so that there isn't something preventing that metal lid from attaching, from sealing, or from whatever rubber gasket. Maybe you have the two-piece lid like this. It will not. It would having all that sticky stuff there would prevent it from sealing properly. So in this case, it's just so that I don't have sticky jars that I'm then handling and putting in the freezer. So put those jar lids on nice and tight. Again, same steps, just for different reasons here. So we still want that to sit on tightly, but it's not for the same reason that it has to hold that lid on during processing. So we talked about that fingertip tight for canning. So it's still tight, but you don't have to, super crank it on there, which I don't recommend anyway for hot water bath canning. So I got a little bit of dribble here. There we go. All right, so that is essentially how we are doing those strawberry jams. Label, date, put into the freezer, and then you'll see that they will gel. Those are probably good. So the recipe says you can also refrigerate them. Refrigerate for up to 3 weeks. You can freeze for up to 3 months. And again, that's when they are at their best. They will probably be fine beyond 3 months. I always like to see, it's hard for me to know how long things last, because around here they usually get eaten before, they go bad. So I run across that in a lot of recipes. Well, how long does this last? I don't know. I've never taken it to its limit because somebody ate it before we got there. So, all right. Okay, so back to our herbal jelly. All All right, so we had that sugar. I almost said salt. We had that sugar in our jelly. Bring this closer here. So now I am going to do a little bit of heating up. I'm going to take a small pot, and I'm looking at this. You know what? I think I need a little bit larger pot than what I allow, just to be on the safe side. I want to over spillage here. So I'm going to put water, and I'm just doing a half recipe. So if you're looking at those going, that doesn't look like 3/4 a cup of water. So I'm just doing a half recipe. I was running out of sugar, so I didn't want to go overboard with how much I was going to prepare, because I didn't think I had enough sugar to go around. That's all right. So I'm putting the water and the pectin into the saucepan. So now the pectin that I'm using is this regular Sure-Gel powdered pectin. Okay, so I'm not using freezer pectin for this, which is why we need to heat it up. So this recipe, you could absolutely go through with the canning process with this, but you don't have to. You can certainly just make this into your freezer jelly. Okay, so we're going to let that go. I'm going to give it a cover so it heats up a little bit faster. I was all prepared with my pot, and then I changed my mind. I called an audible at the last minute. So let me see if there are any questions as we go on here. You could, so Deborah's asking if you could make it red with beet juice or powder. Sure. So beet juice would be wonderful. Beet juice has a very specific flavor, as do things, like turmeric that you might use for coloring. So you could just do a little splash, maybe. And again, in this case, because we're not doing a canning process where we want to be very specific about what ingredients we add. You've heard me talk about, hot water bath canning is for high acid foods. And so in this case, since you're putting it in the freezer or the refrigerator, you can safely add those things and not have to worry about the pH of your product. So yeah, good ideas. I also find that, so we did an infusion with these herbs, but if you wanted to juice your herbs, let's say you had just a ton, I do have a ton of lemon balm. Now I know that when it is introduced to heat, it does kind of take on that brown, it can take on that brown cast, but you could try to juice some of these herbs and come up with a very dark green juice, and work it from there. So I'm just going to leave that there. If you wanted to experiment with that in some way, again, if it's a freezer jelly or refrigerator jelly, you can dig up whatever recipe you want. I don't recommend just going off-road with recipes for canned items. But for that one, just an idea, I'll leave that there for you. Okay, so this is boiling quickly here. I'm adding the pectin. Get my other whisk here. Turning this way down. We're just heating the water. This is one thing about doing half a recipe. There's not a lot in here to mix, but we're going to mix this for about a minute. I turned it way down, and then we're going to add our herb infusion. So I mentioned powdered pectin versus liquid pectin. So if you see a recipe that calls for one or the other of those, stick to what the recipe says. They are different, and you will notice if you take a recipe side by side of one that calls for powdered pectin versus liquid, you'll see that the process of when and how you add them is different. So I don't recommend taking liberties with that. Okay. So from here, I'm going to add the herb infusion with the sugar, and start to bring that back up to a boil. Now I think I need to grab a new. So these can make really wonderful gifts. However, if you're giving preserve gifts that are not shelf stable, make sure that the recipient knows, hey, you gotta put this in the fridge. You know, this isn't something that can just sit on your shelf, you know, all summer or winter. So just make sure that they know that there's some kind of a little note on the jar or on the card or something. I'm going to turn this back up and we're going to stir it for a few minutes. All of the information is on those recipes that you'll get. It's pretty hot. I'm going to grab a hot pan here. I have asbestos hands, but this is kind of getting beyond my tolerance level. And so I know that I don't quite have enough jars for this one. Like I said, I cut the recipe in half, but I still could have used 4 jars, so we're going to do the best we can in filling those. I'll go for a tiny bit. So typically you want to stir it constantly. I'm going to let this go for like 2 seconds and just rinse off my jar filler. Where did my jar filler go? Here it is. So that we can fill these and not have strawberry juice going into our herbal mixture. You want to stir it. You want to try to stir it constantly. The reason for that is that you don't want to get any clumps of that pectin. And so hopefully, as I stepped away there for a minute, I'm not going to get that. Yeah, it's all good. So again, just remember, this isn't going to gel immediately. You could put one of your jellies in the fridge and see how many days it takes for it to gel. Shouldn't take too long. Might even gel in a few hours. While I'm waiting for that, I'm going to taste this strawberry jam and see what we've got. It's plenty sweet. I can't even imagine having like twice as much sugar in there. When there is that much sugar, then I always say like just a little bit, you know, if I am eating it on toast, a little bit is plenty. So if you are concerned about the amount of sugar going into some of these preserves, and you don't want to have to buy 3 different kinds of jelly if you're making, let's say, canned preserves, Pomona pectin, I don't have the box from the Pomona today. Pomona pectin is called universal pectin. And there are instructions inside of the box. Every box of pectin comes with a little set of instructions and some recipes. Pomona pectin can go in different ways. So there are ways inside, there are little notes inside of the box on the recipes and on the instructions that tell you if you want to do low sugar, no sugar, if you want to use honey. So that's very helpful to know that you can buy one ingredient and it's going to cover anything you might want to do. And Pomona pectin has been known to be a little bit more natural in its composition. I could read the ingredients on this. Dextrose, citric acid, fruit pectin. And fruit pectin typically comes from the inner rind of citrus fruits. So anyway, you know, those types of things. You know, citric acid is, you know, that's from like citrus fruit as well. Dextrose, you know, is technically a chemical. It's a sugar, but it's synthesized. So the Pomona pectin is a little bit more natural, just for whatever it's worth. All right, so I'm going to turn this off. And we'll start to fill our jars. So in this case, because this is heated, it would be helpful to have those jars tempered. So if you remember in our other canning classes, I talked about that coffee pot, that empty coffee pot, when it's put back on the burner, it has the opportunity to crack if it's left there. So with this, same thing. So I'm going to get a little dish, just like a little casserole dish to set these jars into. Be right back. So because I just have a couple, I'm just going to use like an 8x8 pan here and set them in there. And and to temper them before we fill them. Okay, so I have my kettle heating up. I have this container here of our crackers from yesterday. Let me show that to you. Look at all the crackers we ended up making. And I didn't even use the other half of the dough. Now I had made 2 batches of dough for the ones to show you and the ones to make ahead, but it made so many crackers. So hopefully you had fun watching that yesterday and you get a chance to do it. And it was hard not to nibble on them all night. So, I'm gonna taste this one. So again, it was lemon balm, and then I did add some fresh lemon zest. You could, and I added dried as well, because I only had 1 lemon and it didn't quite cover what I needed for the recipe. It tastes like lemonade. So these jellies, especially the clear, well, the jelly is the clear one. You could even use them as, you know, it will be gelled, but you could use them in a cocktail or some kind of a summer beverage. So you could you could avoid putting the pectin in there and just use that simple syrup that we essentially made with the sugar and the herb infused water, and make some kind of a infusion for a drink. That is leading me to think about a class for next week, perhaps. I just made rhubarb syrup this week with some rhubarb from my yard, and I added ginger and orange. So maybe we'll take that into next week, some ingredients for summer beverages. They don't have to be, you know, adult beverages, but that might be kind of fun. So we'll see. I'm getting ideas as we go. But on that note, I know we still have tomorrow for this week, but if you're getting any ideas about classes that you want to see, please let me know, and I will do my best to accommodate those requests based on what ingredients that I have access to at this time. All right, so that is heating up. I'm going to make a little landing spot here for this pot. Get my jar filler ready. So let's see, are there any questions so far? Hey Jan, how are you? Yes, so Jan is asking about the recipes. Okay, so the Milwaukee Rec Department on their Facebook page should have a PDF to all of the recipe packets from these classes. They've been great to put those up ahead of time. Otherwise, by the end of each week, I will put those onto my MP Facebook page, and you'll see them. It will be a different format. Theirs is more of the actual handout that I've created. Mine will just be a cut and paste that you would then have to, if you wanted a hard copy, you would have to, you know, print it out, cut and paste maybe again. So Rec Department's link is the way to go. You could even get it now if you have access from whatever stream you're watching from. I'm glad you're here. Alright, so let's temper these jars. So you just put a little bit of water in there. You don't have to, you know, bring it all the way up to the brim. Just maybe a ½ inch or so, and that glass will conduct the heat all the way up. So let them sit there for a little bit, get a little toasty. And so if you start to see, I'm going back to these strawberry ones, if you see some separation in these where you see the bottom looks like, you know, it's more juice than solids, that's okay. You've heard me say in the past, you know, with some of these, you may not get a blue ribbon at the state fair, which unfortunately is canceled this year. So you have another year to practice your jam technique so you can get that blue ribbon. But it's okay. It's just an aesthetic thing. It will still taste wonderful. In this case, because the strawberries were frozen and then we thawed them, there's less of a chance, this actually doesn't look too bad, there's less of a chance that we'll have that fruit floating. It's typically when the first time we introduce that fruit or those vegetables, you know, maybe dilly beans or green beans, 4 dilly beans, it's the first time it's introduced to the heat and the cell wall breaks. That's what makes it go whoop, because the air cell has been broken inside of there. And so another advantage of using some frozen and then thawed, or something that's been pre-cooked, like, you know, pickled beets, I never have a problem with those floating because they are going to be cooked before I then can them. All right, so I believe that these jars should be tempered. Let's get one more hot pad here to bring this pot to the table. And we'll start to fill. if you could see that color before when I tilted the bowl forward. So it's just kind of a yellowish color, which honestly, when I make herbal jellies for my client, they kind of all end up looking the same. When I've made chive jelly, a couple of years, I took the chive flowers, which I managed to get when I was making the jellies, and I put a little chive flower in each one of them, so at least there was some way to differentiate. I mean, I always label them so he knows what's in them, but it was a way for it to aesthetically be differentiated from the others. So you could, if you wanted to have pieces of the herb floating in here, that would be fine. I would still call it a jelly because it's mostly liquid. But maybe you want to put a little piece of the herb just as a nod to the lemon balm or whatever you have. All right, so there was plenty of that to go around. I'll put the rest of that into some jars later. Again, I didn't bring enough up from the basement for now, but we have our lemon balm jelly. How would you use this is the question I often get. If you like jelly on your toast, you can put it, use it in that way. We just mentioned, maybe using some of it for some beverages. Even if it is, gelled by the time you shake it up, or, maybe you're heating something up a little bit to make a mixture. It'll mix in, don't worry. We'll have some fun figuring out some new ideas by trying. So you could use it with, savory items if you wanted to use it on meats, or mix it in with, I like mixing jelly and jam in with yogurt. You could use any of these jellies as a glaze on a fruit tart. So tomorrow we're going to do fruits and herbs. And so if you were making a fruit tart, maybe you've seen some of those at pastry shops that are beautiful designs of, a rainbow of strawberries, berries, kiwi, oranges just fanned out, and then they're just shining. Typically, having been in the pastry world, it's an apricot glaze that you use, and you thin it out and then kind of paint it on there. But you could use your herbal jelly and thin it out just a bit, heat it up and then brush it on there to give it that nice sheen on the top of the tart, and have this wonderful herb flavor. So that would be kind of fun. What else? I don't know. Let me know what else you discover that you might use it for. Any suggestions? Some of you have been really great about coming up with ideas for how to use some of these things. Any kind of jam, I told you how I use it, but also, taking some of that and mixing it into, let's say you're making a strawberry rhubarb crumble, crisp, whatever. Mixing a little bit of that in. So if you find that you have way more jam than you can possibly eat on toast, get creative and mix it in with some desserts. So, or a layer in a layered cake. You could put the preserves, between layers of cake and then stack it up. Same thing with this. You could do that. You could glaze each layer with an herbal jelly. So as I'm going here, stream of consciousness, I'm getting more, and this, and this. So whatever works. So then we can take those out, and we'll let these all cool down, and then of course label and date before we put them into the freezer. So the strawberry one really wasn't heated up at all, but this one just needs to cool down slightly. It's not as hot as it would be if it had just come out of the kettle, so that's nice. But still, you want to make sure that you cool that fully before you put it into the freezer, so it doesn't bring the temperature down in the freezer. So sorry, hit a button there. Okay. Any other questions about these freezer jams and jellies? Tomorrow we are going to make, let's see. Yes, Deborah, cracker cheese dollop of herbal jelly, bingo. Ooh, and the crackers we made yesterday. Too bad we're not doing a cheese making class. We could have this whole thing composed from items that we made. So you could have your crackers from yesterday, maybe some soft cheese, like a little brie or goat cheese or something, and then a dollop of the herbal jelly. Love it. You know what I'm going to be doing right after this? I'm going to go have a snack with those crackers and the remaining, well, I have to wait a little bit till it gels, I guess. But anyway, thank you for the ideas. Beautiful. So tomorrow we are going to be doing fruits and herbs. So some ideas for you there. The items that we're making tomorrow, I did put into my blurb that they could be, for various things, not just for dessert. But it turns out that most of them kind of lean towards the desserty. Actually, you could have a fruit salad with herbs for breakfast or any time of the day. But I'm not doing any that are specifically savory, but I will discuss those. So tune in tomorrow for that, same time, 2 o'clock, and we'll see you then. And so I thank you all for coming. If you have any additional questions, you can put them right here on the thread. I'll get them later. I'll get notification later. Or you can always private message me. So if you don't find those handouts, let me know, and I'm happy to share them in an attachment. Unfortunately, I can't attach the syllabus to a post, but I will have those posted on my MP Facebook page by Friday. So I'll see you then. Thanks again for coming. Enjoy your day. Stay cool.